Whether you are a parent that is considering co-signing a loan for your student or a student trying to figure out how to pay for college and make ends meet with a loan, but you're curious if you need a cosigner, this video is going to answer all your questions as far as whether a cosigner is needed, when is it required, and how to go about it. Now make sure you hit subscribe right now, click that button so that you don't miss any future videos on how to pay for college without student loan debt. Hello, my name is Jocelyn Pearson, founder of the Scholarship System, where we redefine paying for college so that families can get through college years without being saddled in that student loan debt. Now, if you're watching this video, you might be about to sign the dotted line and borrow that money, but the good news is that in the future, you or your students can actually avoid having to take out that student loan debt if they pursue scholarships. So I'm actually going to link to a free training in the description below on how to secure scholarships. In fact, I use this to get 6 figures in scholarships and graduate completely debt-free. But that said, again, this can change the situation for future semesters, even if you or your student has to borrow right now. Let's get back to co-signing because, again, I do realize that in some situations, we simply just have to make ends meet in order to get that bill paid right now. Since many students have not had a chance to build up their own credit and get a credit score of their own, or they don't have a salary, for example, to show any kind of financial responsibility, it's hard for them to be able to borrow in some situations. This is when co-signing could be what gets them that money that they need if they're short on covering the bill to go to college. But what is a cosigner? A cosigner is a person who agrees to repay a loan if that initial borrower is not able to. So that is what we're saying when we co-sign on a student loan. Now you might be thinking, well, do we have to do this? Do we need a cosigner? This really depends on the type of loan. So first and foremost, federal student loans, when it comes to undergraduate, they never require a cosigner. So if your student is able to get federal student loans, that is done by submitting FAFSA. So if you've watched any of my other videos, I always say to submit FAFSA. If you're curious about that, we will link to our FAFSA playlist in the description so that you can learn everything you need to do in order to submit that and potentially access federal loans, which typically have better terms, but again, they also do not require that cosigner. Now, when it comes to graduate school, they may need a cosigner. So graduate is a little different than undergraduate when it comes to federal student loans. Now, when it comes to private loans, so say your student needs more money than what they were given in federal student loans, or maybe you didn't do FAFSA for some reason, or maybe your student just wasn't given federal student loans. If that's the case, then private student loans might be the path for your student to cover that remaining gap of the bill. If that's the case, then typically a cosigner is required, again, because students haven't had a chance to really build up any kind of credit history or their credit score. Now, lastly, another situation where cosigners would be required is often refinancing. If a student is refinancing and again, they haven't had a chance to build up their credit history or anything, then they would need a cosigner for that. Now, if they're refinancing after they've already established a career and have a salary or built up their credit somehow since they were 18, then they may not. But this is a situation where it could be a possibility. So let's talk about the perks of having a cosigner. Well, first and foremost, typically a cosigner will allow a student to borrow at a lower interest rate. That's because they're gaining the benefits of that other person, that cosigner's strong financial credit score, and typically, hopefully, a low debt to income ratio. So the amount that they have borrowed to the amount that they are given, that they're allotted, that they can borrow. So this can typically get the student better terms than if, say, they were able to do it on their own. A second perk of having a cosigner is that it can typically increase their eligibility. So for example, say they need to borrow $50,000, but they would only be approved for $10,000 on their own. Having that cosigner could bump them up to get that full amount that they need. And lastly, having a cosigner could mean that your student could get this student loan and build up their own credit. So they still will benefit even if they have a cosigner on the loan. So maybe they wouldn't be approved on their own, so they wouldn't be able to build up their credit, but by having a cosigner, they can be approved, they can make the payments, and therefore they can start building that credit history. Comment below, what credit score do you think is necessary in order to be a cosigner? Let me know in the comments below what you think it is, because for me, it was actually surprising where they typically want cosigners to land. Let me know in the comments. So we talked about the pros of having a cosigner. Now let's talk about the cons. So when it comes to co-signing, we actually tell parents to proceed with caution. And here is the main reason. The main reason for proceeding with caution is because co-signers are legally responsible for that loan if the student cannot or decides not to pay it back. Now, I want to share just a quick cautionary tale. Actually, this isn't a tale. This is a true story. We found a mom that co-signed on $100,000 for her daughter. Unfortunately, when her daughter graduated from college, she was unable to find a job. And so for some reason, she just decided not to pay those student loans. The problem was with her mother as a co-signer, she was damaging her mother's credit score in addition to her own. The mother, of course, did not want this to happen. And so she has been paying on that student debt to this day. And of course, it also damaged their relationship because that is a really significant difference in monthly payments for the mom. And of course, when co-signing, she didn't think this would ever happen. So I always say, of course, we hope that this would never be your situation. And hopefully every student will get a job and they'll be able to make their payments, or they'll decide to make the payments no matter what. But the truth is, no matter what, if you're the co-signer, you're on the hook, whether you like it or not, and whether they can pay it or not, whether they decide to, whether they're a child, it doesn't matter. And the other thing with student debt is that it typically cannot be claimed in bankruptcy. Once you have that borrowed, once you've co-signed on that debt, it's with you and it's not going to go away. Once you've signed the dotted line, once you've co-signed for debt, once you've borrowed the money, it's yours. Now, that said, also, like I said, if payments are not made, this can negatively impact the co-signer's credit score, which can impact the ability to buy houses or cars or whatever you need your credit score for in the future. And then lastly, like we saw in that story, it can damage relationships. So be very cautious when it comes to co-signing, please. Now, another aspect that's important to consider when it comes to co-signing is that co-signers typically are on the loan until it's paid back. So many loan companies will not allow you just to remove a co-signer after college or once they've graduated or later on. That typically would have to be done through refinancing. If you want to learn more about refinancing, we will link to our video on refinancing in the description below. It should also pop up on the screen somewhere now. Now, some lenders may allow a cosigner to be removed, but again, that is certainly the exception, not the majority. Now, what happens if you cosign and it's not paid back? So typically the lender will go after the cosigner as well as the original student who borrowed the money. Eventually, if no payments are made, then they can sue the primary borrower as well as the cosigner in order to get that money back. A lawsuit is really the only way that a lender can take money from someone's paycheck or their bank account. So I think I made enough warnings around co-signing, but at the same time, there are situations where it just has to be the case, or maybe you are more than happy to be a co-signer. So who can be a co-signer? Well, that can be family, relatives, friends, spouse. There really aren't rules as far as who can be the co-signer as long as they generally have a credit score of 700 or above. You can try to apply as a co-signer with a lower credit score than that, but typically they're looking for 700 or higher. And lastly, it can only be one person. So even if, say, a student, both parents are willing to co-sign, you just want to typically pick one that has the best credit history. That way they can get the best terms, but you can only have one person as a cosigner, not two. Now, if you want to just avoid student loans in the future and not even have to worry about cosigning, then make sure you check out that free training. Again, it's linked in the description. You can check that out once we wrap up here. Okay, so should you do it? Co-signing a loan is a serious obligation, so you want to make sure that you sit down with your students and really discuss the potential ramifications of it. Make sure that they understand the consequences, not just to them, but also to you if they were not to make the payments. This is not something to jump into lightly. One thing that we always stress with parents is that you cannot borrow for retirement. You have to have a strong financial situation for retirement. And so make sure that you're taking care of yourself first. So again, there are situations where this simply has to be the case, but you do not ever want to put yourself in a tough financial situation in years within reach of retirement when a student could find a way around paying for college. Maybe it's a more affordable school or any of the strategies that are on this YouTube channel. All right. So again, if you are to cosign, there are some benefits. It could help a student get a loan that they wouldn't typically get. It could help them get a higher amount if they need it. Maybe they can even get a better interest rate. But again, we always say proceed with caution, and make sure you hit subscribe, because every single week we release a new strategy on how to avoid the student loan debt. And lastly, don't forget that free training I mentioned in the description that could potentially eliminate the need for any co-signing in the future. Again, my name is Jocelyn Pearson, founder of the Scholarship System, and I will see you in the next video.